This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Combine started rolling on at least one field in central Nebraska this week. Hello folks, thanks for joining us on This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson here in the studio because Max Armstrong is over in Grand Island this week for Husker Harvest Days. We'll have updates from Max coming throughout the show. Grand Island was the site of some excitement earlier in the week. Sunday night it was reported that the JBS plant, Grand Island's largest employer, had caught fire. Firefighters from around the region battled the blaze all night Sunday night and throughout the morning on Monday, finally getting it extinguished. JBS does say that plant is back operational and the impact on the cattle market was minimal. But of course, at the Husker Harvest Days show, one of the most important things is seeing all of the equipment running in the fields. And in order for that equipment to run, a farmer has to keep that ground in good shape. Max had a chance to talk with Mr. Libby about the work that it took to get the grounds in shape for this year.
It had been 730 days, Mike, since folks last came through the gates of Husker Harvest Days. They were ready to come to this show that's really taken on a national scope here in this part of the Corn Belt, the largest totally irrigated outdoor farm show in America. So that means because of that irrigation draw, you have producers coming here not just from Nebraska, but other places in the Corn Belt, in the Plain States, even farther away than that. Crop conditions here were looking pretty good. It's been a reasonably good growing season, and the crops were ready to harvest. And the assistant show site manager, Jason Libby, has watched this farm all year long and what's gone on out here. Jason, how's the growing season been?
Very good. We got started at April 13th, ran into a cold snap for about 4 or 5 weeks. It took a while for the corn to come out of the ground, but Mother Nature helped us off and turned the heater on and got caught up real quick there in July. Corn's coming out at about 20, 21 moisture. Good yields, maybe 5 to 8% better than last year.
No kidding, up from a year ago. So the pollination went well here?
Yeah, we got early, we pollinated before all the heat came through. Some of the longer season corn out here suffered a little bit, but the short season was bad.
Do you go with a shorter season variety here so that you can have something available to harvest at showtime?
Yeah, we go with a 98 to 102 day corn, planted as early as we can. And with the dates being later, the show revolves every other year or whatever, so sometimes we have to go down to 95.
With the standability challenges that some growers have had this year, strong winds in some places and hail in others, did you run into any storm challenges here?
We ran into a little bit July 9th or 10th. Wasn't as bad out here, but the east side of town got it hit pretty bad. We only had about 70 mile an hour out here.
We saw a little social media posting in recent days of some dryland corn coming out in south central Nebraska. Whereabouts are most of the growers around here in terms of their start of the harvest season?
Well, hopefully they're all going to come out here before they get in the combine and have a good time. But I think probably end of the week, first part of next week, there'll be a majority of them that'll probably start hitting some early 2.4, 2.5 beans and maybe some short season or dryland corn.
There's quite a bit of seed corn production in the region. I would imagine that's been coming out already, correct?
Yes, I actually raised seed for Pioneer, and they started on the 25th of August this year, which is about 5 days earlier than they normally do.
So many places across the heartland, soybeans have been going in earlier and earlier. Is that the case in Nebraska here too?
Yeah, we actually planted all the short season corn around here, and we had these beans in on the 20th out here. We'll probably harvest them Monday after the show.
Has that shown benefits here in recent years as it does for the other growers in terms of a yield boost on the beans?
Yes, most definitely. If you like to roll the dice and play the game, the earlier the bean or the earlier planted is usually the better off.
Jason Libby is always busy at showtime, as you can imagine, Mike, with so much going on in the fields. While it's not quite the scope of the field demonstrations at the Farm Progress Show, there is a lot to see when those machines are on the move.
Thank you, Max. And Jason Libby's got good corn there in central Nebraska coming out on the Husker Harvest Days grounds. Well, it's time to see what that corn is worth out in the global marketplace. To help us make sense of what all is happening, Garrett Toy from Ag Trader Talk is with us this week. Garrett, you farm in northern Illinois. Has harvest gotten underway yet in your neck of the woods?
We'll be getting going pretty heavily here either this weekend or early next week. This warm temperatures have really dried things down. The cost of propane where it's at, I think guys are willing to wait a little bit, but we have some pretty strong cash premiums for early corn that people are being able to capture. Tar spot kind of came on here a little bit as of late, and I don't think anybody really wants to mess with disease pressure here and wants to get it out of the field in case we get some wind later on, that sort of thing. But we'll be going pretty hard, this time next week.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common across all of the northern corn belt. Guys are itching to get running. Garrett, let's talk about this corn market a little bit. Following last week on Friday, USDA released their supply and demand estimates. We saw corn have a reversal, moved higher, broke out again midweek this week. Can we say that the harvest low is in?
That's absolutely what people are looking at. We had that dip down to the low on the crop report. We reversed on Monday, rallied, went back and tested those lows on Tuesday, and then we've rallied ever since. And by definition, you would think that that's a definition of a harvest low. We went down, tested those 510, 511 numbers. We got the September off the board. I was kind of surprised that we pushed through the 5.25 area as easily as we did and pushed highs into 537 areas. The most logical area is a movement back to that 550 area, that area that we kind of congregated around there prior to the hurricane. I don't think we necessarily get back to those levels. I did think that we were due for a bounce. Whether these are the lows or not, we're still fairly early in harvest, and export sales were a little bit disappointing this week. I do think that everybody is looking for those lows. I think they are. I think that 510 area might hold here if these yields do come in a little bit more disappointing. But we do have, demand issues that we're focusing on.
Well, and let's take a look at those demand issues. You mentioned the disappointing export sales in corn this past week. Garrett, do you read this as just a blip? Maybe buyers are waiting to see if we can dip a little lower into harvest, or is this a sign of something more troublesome ahead for corn demand?
We're still dealing with the after effects of the hurricane, and U.S. FOB values went through the roof because of the hurricane. We can't load anything. I think last thing I read, we've got 9 shippers moving. We're slowly coming back online. They got power back to that Cargill Reserve facility that had the conveyors flip that everybody saw online, but. When we had those issues at the Gulf, that kind of firmed everyone else up. Ukraine was the cheapest offers out there, through the strip, which made me had some suggestions that China would book most of their sources out of Ukraine this year. But because of the hurricane, everyone went to the cheapest source. That was Ukraine, pushed their premiums up. In fact, I had heard some comments, chatter that China might have sold some cargoes back because they had bought them at cheaper values and sold them back to capitalize on the firming values. But for the near term, until we really get the Gulf loadings going back up, we're doing some sales. This week's sales are disappointing, but until we start actually shipping some corn out of the country, everybody's kind of on pins and needles as far as what's this going to mean for export potential. And domestically, the demand situation, Garrett, we continue to see the driving season come to a close. What's your take on ethanol production and demand here as we roll into the fall? Stocks are historically tight. They've tightened up here because the plants are coming off of seasonal downtimes. Margins are actually kind of decent, but I suspect that they'll start to ease here once these plants start to come back online and we kind of hit some equilibrium here between as you mentioned, the slowdown in seasonal driving demand as well as increased production. So we're going to get to a point where the crushers will probably continue to grind for ethanol. October, November, December is their strong months seasonally. We should see some decent demand numbers on that front. And we've continued to see basis stay strong at ethanol plants, which is a good sign. Yeah, that's a function of the tight old crop situation. I don't think that will truly, and it may not ease, but we're so early into harvest that, we're still trying to grasp at straws, trying to get these new crop supplies in and trying to get some near-term coverage done. All right. Well, we'll be back for more market discussion with Garrett Toy when we return.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by the Soybean Checkoff. Tips, videos, how-tos, and more. If it has to do with ag tech, you'll find it in the Tech Tool Shed, your unbiased one-stop resource. And we're back talking markets with Garrett Toy from Ag Trader Talk. Garrett, in the first segment, you mentioned the trouble that's been caused in the export game thanks to Hurricane Ida. Of course, beans were certainly impacted by that. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the soybean export market right now.
A lot of moving shells right now. The Chinese had, because of their poor crush margins through the summer when they enforced regulations that tried to limit speculation, it caused their crush margins to absolutely collapse. We're back to normal levels now, but because of that, the crushers have largely been buying hand to mouth their soybean needs. And this hurricane was the worst possible scenario for them, because they don't really need any supply disruptions, especially when you're in a just-in-time inventory situation. So they've been forced to, there's still available beans in Brazil. They're extremely expensive. They've bought anywhere from 10 cargoes this week, trading $4.20 over the Nove, ex-Brazil, they've canceled 2 cargoes, or they canceled a couple cargoes yesterday out of the U.S. They had a flash sale of a couple cargoes here today. So, basically what happens is the longer that these exports, or the lack that we're not seeing any shipments out of the Gulf continue, it's opening, they're potentially narrowing the export window here. Now the argument is if we're anywhere close to being able to ship when those contracts get to be executable, then maybe they get canceled and they come back to the U.S. The risk is that they don't. They're lost business, and that just further narrows this window, especially when Brazil is getting into the field at a normal time, and you're starting to see trades from Brazil into China for February timeframes. So if we only have a November to January export window, the U.S. export program could be, pretty poor. The other side of that is if they're able to pay $4.20 over, they're taking $1 to $2 losses reportedly on these. But if they're able to pay that kind of numbers for emergency cargoes, then maybe their crush margins are a little bit better than what we expect. Their hog prices continue to deteriorate there. The government came out and said they're going to buy more pork for state reserves just to support it. The argument is that they've got too many hogs. So if we have hogs, they have to feed it. I did see that they had bought, they're back in the sorghum market this week and bought a couple cargoes. So, they're back in the feed grain market, which they support, which would say that they have a pretty decent hog supply on hand. But until we get the Gulf situations rectified and we can start loading, the U.S. bean export program is up in the air.
Well, domestically, demand still seems fairly solid. Saw the crush for last month was above the month prior. Garrett, we're still seeing a positive profitability for domestic crushers?
Crush has improved. It's off its highs. We had 5-month highs on crush this week, but we've had the lowest fourth quarter crush in 5 years. So considering the November highs, the daily crush rate was off about 15%. So we really throttled down crush there in the fourth quarter. The problem was meal, and there were some signs that soybean oil demand was an issue as well. However, I think we have a more normal crush rate. Meal values still aren't 100%, so I don't think we see as heavy of a crush rate in first quarter of this year that we did last year.
Well, Garrett, we've got just a few seconds to go, but the cattle market, we had another fire at the JBS plant in Grand Island. We just took it in stride. Is that your take?
It was a one-day deal. It was in the tallow room. They were able to divert, and it almost seemed like it had a bigger influence on the veg oil for renewable diesel than it did than anything. But no, the cattle market D's, what I'm looking at, we went down. Has been a lack of a better term, a fire sale since the move to 136. We went down, tested the 200-day moving average, bounced. I thought we'd revert back to this 130 level, but we can't push through it seems like, and that's kind of disappointing for me.
It is indeed. Well, Garrett Toy from Ag Trader Talk, thanks for being with us.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform. combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Technology improvements continue to come quite rapidly. Chad Colby is our man on the ground, keeping us up to speed on everything that's happening in the world of technology. And there were some big announcements this week from Apple.
Oh, here we go this week. Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Colby, and Apple rolled out their next generations of products this past week, and I can't wait to share them with you. The new Series 7 watch charges 33% faster. It's got a 20% bigger screen and loaded with more features. Also, they rolled out 2 new major enhancements to the tablets, to their iPad. They rolled out a new iPad and an iPad mini. That iPad, that's the starter version, and it starts at like under $400. It also has something called Center Stage. My iPad Pro that was released a few months ago, it has that feature. You can see right here, while you're on FaceTime, it stays centered with the target automatically without moving the device. That intro model, they've done a lot of great things with that. They've also really enhanced the iPad mini. Now, this isn't for everyone, but if you need a smaller compact size, but you need big-time performance, this is the device for you. They've added all those great features of the Pro, but put it in the size of the Mini. There's the new iPhone 13. Now, I think for a lot of people, you get confused on all these models, but on this one, they've pulled out all the stops. This has the most advanced camera system ever. I wanted to give you a little example of some of the technology in this smartphone. And you have to understand, for a lot of us, we use the camera to communicate, and whether that's in the media platform like you're participating today, or even in our lives, that's what we use the phone for. But this phone goes deeper than that. It's got a new processor, the A15 Bionic processor. This phone can also run at speeds of 120 hertz. That is a huge deal. We're talking about reaction time. And there's so much more than that. 25% brighter screen, as much as 2.5 hours longer battery life. I could go on. And iOS 15 is coming out next week. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad. It's incredible the amount of technology we can hold in the palm of our hand here in 2021. Folks, don't go away. When the show returns, we'll have more from Husker Harvest Days from Max Armstrong. Thanks for joining us on This Week in Agribusiness. Early on in the program, we heard from Garrett Toy about the troubles that the export holdup has had thanks to Hurricane Ida down in the Gulf. We wanted to dig into that in a little more detail, so we turned to our friend Mike Steenhoek. Mike is the Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, and he's joining us right now. Mike, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Give us an update. How are repairs and restorations coming down there in the Gulf Coast outside New Orleans after Hurricane Ida?
Well, the good news is that we are seeing that area of the country slowly recover. We're seeing vessel loading of grain and soybeans actually occur. So that's the good news, particularly for an area of the country that accounts for 61% of U.S. soybean exports, 58% of corn exports, by far the number one launching point for both commodities onto the international marketplace. So seeing that recovery occur is very encouraging. What we continue to really focus on moving forward is there still needs to be some power restoration to some of the outlying areas around New Orleans, and that does affect some of these soybean and grain export facilities. And there's also one particular export facility, a Cargill facility, about 30 miles northwest of New Orleans in the town of Reserve, Louisiana, that did sustain some pretty considerable damage to its loading apparatus, the conveyor system that's used for loading ocean vessels. And that's going to be a pretty lengthy repair. And, the big question is how long that will actually take, but it certainly could impede our exports out of that region, particularly as we hit the fall harvest season.
Well, so Mike, other than that Cargill plant, are most of the other export facilities going to be close to capacity by the time harvest hits into full swing here in a few weeks in the Corn Belt?
Yeah, we anticipate that, and that's really key, is to make sure that you've got that infrastructure operating at full throttle. particularly when you start hitting October and November, most recent weeks prior to Hurricane Ida, we would export about 10 million bushels of soybeans on a weekly basis out of those export facilities along the lower Mississippi River. In late October and November, when our export program is at its apex, we can easily export 55 million bushels, so over 5 times the volume. So, we clearly need to make sure that we've got those facilities up and operating on all cylinders when we really hit that key export window for soybeans.
You bet. The clock is running on those folks performing those repairs. Mike, I want to take our attention over to the West Coast because we've been talking for the past, since COVID started, about the delays we're seeing in other ports. And I understand Long Beach and Los Angeles, 2 massive ports, have seen their delays continue to accelerate. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's a real concern. We see our overall global supply chain under a lot of stress, but one of the most tangible examples of that is the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which is the number one port region in the United States in terms of value of freight that comes in and out of this country. A lot of consumer goods get brought in via containers at those 2 key ports, and we recently saw an announcement from the ports of LA Long Beach that there are now 61 ocean vessels that are parked outside, out in the water, waiting for a berth where they can unload their freight, and that is at a historic high. And so that's a real concern that we see, and it does apply certainly to those soybean exporters who utilize containers, these 20-foot or 40-foot long steel boxes. It's not the predominant way we export. We export mostly in a bulk method, but there are an increasing number of exporters who do use these containers because they want to export in smaller volumes with maybe a particular quality profile that are cleaner. So that's something that is certainly impacting those particular exporters. It is a big problem. And unfortunately, we anticipate this congestion throughout the global supply chain. And it's not just related to containers, but it's also things like trucking and rail and space availability on the ships. It's really impacting each link in our supply chain. We would love to see it get relaxed sooner, but this is something that can easily be with us throughout the course of 2021 and well into 2022.
And Mike, my understanding is it's not just North American ports, this is global. Can you talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing happen in China at the receiving ports for American soybeans?
Yeah, I mean, we see whether it could be a weather event like a typhoon, or there's recently been some port shutdowns temporary in China due to one of their port workers, having a case of COVID, and then the Chinese government will just essentially shut down that port for a period of time, and so then that will create a queue and a congestion at those particular ports. And one of the things that we just continue to see is when you've got an overall supply chain that's under stress already just due to market fundamentals, and then you insert in that a weather event or a COVID outbreak, some kind of delay, it really adds insult to injury, and it just really exacerbates the problem. And here we in this country, we've got the holiday season that's rapidly approaching, and so all of those who want to sell goods to the American consumer during this time of the year, they're trying to replenish their inventories to be able to take advantage of that. And so that's really causing a lot of problems as well.
Lots of things to keep an eye on in the global supply chain. Mike Steenhoek from the Soy Transportation Coalition, thanks for joining us this week.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. This past week, of course, was Husker Harvest Days, and Max had a chance to make his way around doing more than just looking at the equipment on display. He had a chance to catch up with a few of the folks who were there in person.
As you know, Mike, it's more than just exhibits to take a look at any show such as Husker Harvest Days. There are those informational and educational presentations. And sometimes big-name market analysts come in to share their thoughts, too. We visited with Richard Brock of Brock & Associates, and I asked him about the big picture right now, not just looking at this soon-to-be harvested crop of corn or soybeans, what may be coming into the bin this fall, but to give us an overview of what he sees that could be moving the markets.
Well, Max, I think there's an awful lot to be optimistic about, and I think there's a reason why farmland values are going into all-time new highs right now. There's a lot of cash out there. Farmers have been profitable, and even though we're well off of our highs in the corn and soybean prices right now, everybody's still very profitable at these levels, and yields are going to be pretty good for the most part, and so that's optimistic. But I think the more optimistic side of it is the worldwide protein demand. China came back in strong buyer of corn last year. They're going to be a good buyer this year, not as strong as last year. But I think now that they've rebuilt their hog herd, they need corn, and they can't produce enough of it. And so we're developing more markets worldwide. I said the only risk I see there right now, and I think it's something we should all be concerned about, is we will see some probably significant increases in soybean and corn acres in South America, and we could see some increases in corn acres in the Ukraine. But I think the world market can handle that pretty well, because you look at the long-term picture. Our worldwide carryover supplies of corn and soybeans are not large. They're not as tight as what some people had been forecasting, but they're very manageable levels. And so if we have any production problems this coming spring with the demand that we have worldwide, I think this market's going to stay strong. And with the near-term problem has been, of course, the Hurricane Ida and the closing of the port in New Orleans. And that resulted, of course, 2 weeks ago in a collapse in the basis throughout the Midwest and all the way down to the Gulf. And as a result of that, we think farmers are going to become very tight holders of grain at harvest time, and they're going to be using grain bins like that one sitting behind me right now. And I think, companies like Brock Manufacturing will benefit because farmers are going to need storage this year. And since they're sitting on a lot of cash, you don't need as much cash as normal this time of year. We think the basis will come back, and I think it's going to be a pretty optimistic year as we move forward.
Richard Brock, Brock & Associates, never at a shortage for words, Mike, as you know. So factor that in with all of the other input and advice you've been getting from market analysts, advisors, and economists.
Thank you, Max. There is a lot going on for market analysts to keep their eyes on this year, and it sounds like the volatility is going to continue.
Now, agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier brings us his farm weather forecast for the nation for the week ahead. It's presented by Pivot BioProven, the nitrogen-producing microbes that stay put, whether or not.
And it's time to talk weather. Greg Solier joins us. And Greg, it looks like we've got some action in the Pacific Northwest this weekend.
Yeah, that's right. The first real fall weather system of meaning has made its presence felt. And as we move on through the beginning part of the week, after some pretty decent rainfall totals, a little snow, the highest peaks of the Cascades and northern and central Rockies, the system heads on to the east. I know it's late in the season. We're just building moisture, subsoil moisture for next year. And pasture lands, too, across the northern plains. 96% of Montana, that topsoil is short and very short. Hopefully we'll get something in there early on into the week. Some cooler to colder air, high pressure builds on in across the Pacific Northwest, so plenty of opportunity for outdoor work. There's a much weaker weather system coming ashore late in the week, otherwise high pressure in control, maybe a little whimper frost and a brief light freeze, low cold spots, southern Canadian prairie up to about the North Dakota border. That's all she wrote for the middle to late parts of the week there. Here we do get a cold front that moves on through the desert southwest. Some gusty winds, no organized precip. The monsoon setup is over and done with. Same with the tropical weather pattern, so nothing through California. Plain states, central and south, a different story. Some showers and thunderstorms. Yeah, we are seeing expanding dryness issues. Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, great for winter wheat planting. Germination, though, a different story. So hopefully some moisture down the line with this weather system early on into the week. Later in the week, pretty quiet weather expected. Heat back in the desert southwest. Seasonal setup for the valleys of California. Warm, dry weather from Nebraska southward through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas.
I know a lot of growers across the central part of the country are ready to get in those combines. Greg, is it going to be a good week for that?
I think early in the week, especially in the eastern Corn Belt locales, where we have a healthy south wind, warmth, and humidity as well coming into almost a midsummer feel. Good moisture reduction, dry down and evaporative loss is expected. Back west of the Missouri, those showers and thunderstorms with that Pacific Northwest weather system, it will take its time moving eastbound. There may be an inch or two. It will take it rainfall for the Dakotas, upper Midwest, and here it is by mid to late portions of the week from the Sioux southward down towards St. Louis. Ahead of it, showers and thunderstorms and some modestly cooler but at least drier air, maybe the start of an extended dry spell again for the western Corn Belt back into the northern and central plains mid to late portions of the week. As mentioned, already talked about the dryness and expanding drought in this corridor southward in through Arkansas. Of course, through this part last week had to deal with a Nicholas and still some remnant tropical moisture. There's been an excess of rainfall here. Here comes a cold front that will accentuate the shower thunderstorm activity on its move into the Delta, into the southeastern states mid to late portions of the week, but at least cooler, drier air and the opportunities to resume winter wheat planting and hopefully some moisture into parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas late in the week as the wet weather continues on down through the Gulf Coast areas.
What do you see happening as we get all the way through the East Coast, Greg?
Again, the eastern Corn Belt in good shape. Still some dryness concerns despite all the stuff of the tropics of the past few weeks into the northeast and New England, but cooler, drier air here. Warmth and some late season humidity on the rise. Eastern Corn Belt, here's that weather system. It's a fairly slow moving one, but its dynamics, its energy are weakening, and hence the rainfall prospects as well. Nonetheless, a couple of showers and thunderstorms not until the late part of the weekend. The drier areas of the northeast and New England, lower lakes region, drier, cooler air expected across the western Corn Belt late in the week. Pretty quiet weather picture across the southeastern part of the country. Late in the week, the tropics get active in the Gulf Coast, across the southwest Atlantic, otherwise par for the course weather in the southeast.
Now, Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country. Presented by Pivot Bio Proven. Visit pivotbio.com to find a representative near you.
Well, Greg, in your forecast there, you mentioned some precipitation this week. Can you give us a little more detail?
Certainly can. And by the way, getting ready to go into the fall equinox. You know what happens with the equinox, don't you?
Equal day and night.
You let it in. Think about that. Only twice a year I get to do that, so there you go. That's right, the fall season, the 22nd at 2:20 in the afternoon in the central time zone. Anything but a real fall setup, by the way, with temperature and humidity in mind throughout much of the heartland, and you'll see it on the extended maps and charts. Maybe more tropical systems, whether they be named or not, in this part of the country will absorb a little Nicholas moisture northward, and some pretty good coverage rainfall for some of the drier areas of the northwestern and western Corn Belt. Later in the week, it will lead to some field work and harvest delays, but short-lived. And what's left of the weekend weather system has a quarter to half inch across the Pacific Northwest and nary a drop into the valleys of California.
Well, Greg, post-equinox, it's fall. Do the temps get a little more fall-like?
They certainly do not. It is very much a warm weather pattern, at least as it applies to the southern plains and eastern Corn Belt locales. And there's a little troughiness into the Pacific Northwest, northern and central plains. No, this is not a major pattern shift. As you will see here in the weeks to come, normal temperatures over the southeastern part of the country. So, still some summertime into the eastern and southern Corn Belt and the plains. And we do anticipate some better news. It does get in the way of harvest. But Pacific Northwest, Canadian border, northern plains, across parts of the Corn Belt, the driest areas, a little above average moisture with this trough moving on through. But it'll begin to weaken. Anytime you get a trough that gets absorbed into these tropical systems here, things fall apart across the upper Midwest. Nonetheless, wet weather over the southeast part of the country. Texas and the southwest is high and dry.
Now, how about that first full week of October? Do those warm temps persist?
They certainly do. No fall in sight here. It is. This is almost a late summer feel across the plains into the Corn Belt locales, complete with low afternoon humidity, good moisture reduction. You will get back out there. Think it's an early harvest coming at us. Different reasons for that, though, in the upper Midwest and the drought areas below over the southeastern part of the country. Normal temperatures Pacific Northwest, where another fall system comes ashore. Look at the expansion under the ridge of dry weather, desert Southwest across the Corn Belt, Plain States. Wet weather continues on up and down the eastern seaboard. That's not a bad thing for the drier areas of New England.
And now finally the week of October 11th. Greg, what do you see?
Temperature-wise, no real cold air in sight, a bit below average with cloud cover and tropical moisture here. Look at the warm ridge across the northern and central plains. Heart of the Corn Belt, temperatures about normal in the southwestern sections of the country. High and dry weather, opportunities galore for harvest. Drought, a different story across much of the plains and Corn Belt locales. Wet weather and the tropics, too, stay very busy across the Gulf Coast out of the southwest and southeastern sections of the country.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
In Max's Tractor Shed this weekend, it's the last one made. Not just the last tractor, but the last mounted corn picker. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Maybe you saw firsthand the quality at the Farm Progress Show or at Husker Harvest Days here. You can go online and learn more at storelock.com. Well, we followed the crop this year on Bill Burnham's farm in Illinois. We saw him planting, saw him cultivating. I was there the other day when he was harvesting the corn with an old New Idea corn picker. It was the last one made in 1975, the last model. The story behind it is his father, Bill Sr., saw this picker at the Farm Progress Show in Illinois in 1975. He came home, went to his dealer. He said, I want a New Idea picker just like that one. The dealer said there aren't any more. There were no more made. Bill Sr. said, I saw this one at the Farm Progress Show. Get that one. Well, that's exactly what happened. This New Idea picker was indeed the same machine that was displayed at the Farm Progress Show in 1975 on the farm there at Malta, Illinois. And, oh, by the way, the tractor powering this picker, as Bill harvested the other day when I was there, was one of the last Farmall M's made, a 1951 M. Oh, with a little extra horsepower, more than 50 horses. Certainly enough to do the job with that New Idea picker on the farm at Morris, Illinois. Well, let's check in with Mark Stock of Big Iron Auctions. We've had the chance in recent days to see his folks at these shows. Let's see what they're talking about in the week ahead.
Well, Max, equipment selling online on BigIron.com right now is getting a lot of attention, and we've got 1,641 items selling on September the 22nd. Brian Holmes is from Vettersburg, Indiana. Check out his John Deere 9510 Max Emerge Combine. He's got a Massey Ferguson 1800 articulated four-wheel drive tractor. He's also got an International 4386 four-wheel drive tractor selling. Salt Creek Farms out of Belleville, Kansas will be selling a 2005 John Deere 7520 mechanical front tractor with a loader. Also, Merwin and Isla Joe Zizit Estate in Farnham, Nebraska will feature 143 items. They've got a Diamond D Tandem Axle custom livestock trailer. Check out their 2012 Cat 287 C2 compact track loader with 1,356 hours. And Stoats Equipment from various locations in Utah and Idaho will be selling a John Deere S670 combine. It's a 2016 model. They got a New Holland H8080 swather plus several other items. Also, Max, we have our classic car auction on Thursday, September the 23rd. Check out the Ford Mustang, the Ford F-150 step-side pickup. We're also selling a Chevrolet El Camino pickup. There's a Chevrolet Chevelle two-door car. Just an unbelievable collection of classic cars selling to the highest bidder on Thursday, September the 23rd on BigIron.com.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
This Week in Agribusiness, of course, is always proud to salute the FFA, and we're still getting to know members of the state officer team from Missouri. Joining us this week is Hannah Shanks. She's a vice president of the Missouri State FFA. Hannah, thanks for joining us, and what prompted you to get involved with FFA?
So FFA has always been rich in my family's history. My dad was in it, and then my siblings all started in it as well. And I remember getting to go with them to practices of a morning. And so even though I was a sixth grader, I got to see what FFA had in store. And I knew from that moment on that it was something that I definitely needed to do and something that I wanted to try a shot at. And once I got in the organization, there were so many different facets to really get to explore in that I really enjoyed getting to grow through this organization.
And so you were active, of course, all throughout high school, and now you're in a leadership role. Hannah, what are you excited about with this upcoming school year as a state vice president?
Yeah, so we have got to do so much stuff already with the leadership side of this, and it has been such a rewarding experience that I wouldn't have traded for the world. I know that I always kind of felt like I wanted to be, I saw the state officers and the area officers, chapter officers in my years prior, and I knew that they did so much for the organization and they were able to give back to the one that gave so much to them. So I really decided that I wanted to be in their shoes, and you work your way up through them, and it was an honor that I got to be a state officer, and I'm glad to be in this position, and hopefully I can impact some members and really show what Missouri FFA has to offer.
That is fantastic, and you plan on staying in the industry. I understand you're at the University of Missouri studying agribusiness. Hannah Shanks, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
Let me begin this week's Samuelson Says on a positive note. Wasn't it fun to see college football stands filled with cheering fans the first weekend of college football? And secondly, for me, I attended several county fairs in the Midwest and was enthused by the spirit and the enthusiasm of the crowds in attendance. Maybe we're putting COVID-19 at least in the back seat. But there are always challenges. And if you're a livestock producer and you're not familiar with Proposition 12 in California, you are going to learn about it. Let me describe it as it was described by Iowa Senator Joni Ernst in a recent interview, and I quote the senator: "Radicals in liberal states like California are punishing our hardworking farmers and producers in Iowa by enforcing Proposition 12, which would require meat products raised outside the state of California to still conform to their radical animal rights standards that California adopted. Approved by California voters in November of 2018, Proposition 12 will ban the sale of pork from hogs born to sows housed in pens that do not meet California's prescribed sow housing standards, regardless of where those hogs are raised." And Senator Ernst concluded by saying, "We know that there is less than 4% of Iowa pork producers that can right now conform to the California standards." And that's important because Californians consume 15% of the bacon in this country. If you're not familiar with Proposition 12, learn more about it because it's going to be a problem for a lot of you. Be safe, be well. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
I know a lot of people like to visit the farm shows like Farm Progress or Husker Harvest Days to take a look at all the shiny paint, but there's more to these shows than just that new equipment. There's also experts, and Max had a chance to catch up with one of them.
One of the stops that we try to make, Mike, when we come to these outdoor farm shows, whether it's the Farm Progress Show or Husker Harvest Days, is to see what Extension is up to. The Cooperative Extension Service in the state, and here in Nebraska, that's no exception. They're trying to stay up with farmers, trying to keep that education to the producers going, as Ron Seymour shared with us at Husker Harvest Days.
We like to visit with the producers about what they can do to make their operations go better for them. And so we really work hard at providing some educational tips, some programs that they can try and to look into, things from on-farm research to economics. We have manure programs and cover crop programs. We have all kinds of things that help the farmer just make their operations more efficient and hopefully make them more money.
And you're more than 3 decades working with Extension here in Nebraska. That message has changed some, no doubt. How has it?
It has changed, and it's more about trying to do those small things and make a big difference. And we're really emphasizing farmers to take the research that the university has been developing through their specialists, through their research scientists, and put it into their fields and try it out on their own with our help so that they can see what works for them. Because what works in a small university plot, that all looks great on paper, but does it work for the farmer? And the only way to really know if it works for the farmer is for them to try it with their equipment, their know-how, and we're there to help them.
We hear so much about research that comes out of the private sector, and of course there are many companies working with producers. Where does Extension fit in there to still play a vital role?
So Extension plays a vital role in that we work with our industry partners and help put out information that they have and try to ground truth it with them. The thing that's really great about Extension is our main product is to sell education. And we are trying to educate people so that they have a better understanding of how it works. And we're not trying to get them to buy into something except trying things and seeing what works for them.
While the Extension Service name is the same, they don't call them county agents anymore. They are Extension educators. And really, indeed, as the folks in the Extension Service would point out, their role is a little bit different today. And the message, certainly, that they carry to producers is not what it was 40, 50, or even 80 years ago.
Thank you, Max. And it is incredible to think about how the Extension agents' roles have changed over the past 80 years, but that's true for a lot of folks in agriculture. As our industry continues to change, This Week in Agribusiness will be here bringing you those changes each weekend. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we'll see you next week right here on This Week in Agribusiness.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.